What's up guys, welcome to Wasted Space, and today I want to talk to you about Dual Universe, because oh my god there is a lot to talk about. Their Kickstarter's just coming to an end, and I wanted to kind of fill you guys in on some of the stuff I'm excited about for it, some of the stuff that I'm a little bit concerned about, because there is a bit of that too, and you've got to keep that in mind with Kickstarter. You're backing kind of the development of the game, you're not actually sort of buying a product, that end thing, so you've got to keep that in mind. So I figured why not update you folks on what's happened since I made this video I linked up here, which isn't even on this channel, it's over on Shaq's channel, but it'll kind of fill you in on the basics of what we knew back then, and then I can add on top of that some of the cool stuff the developers have talked about, and as I said, some of the stuff that from that you can kind of extrapolate some of the things they can't do and some of the things they won't be doing. So first up, I got to talk about server architecture, because it was one of the areas I was kind of concerned about to begin with. These big claims of single shard, getting everybody together in a voxel world. I mean, it's all well and good doing these sort of things in, say, Star Citizen or Eve, or there's lots of games out there that manage to get lots of people in a single area. But it doesn't normally come with, oh, and that area can also be deformed freely, and they'll be flying and building their own ships. So it was interesting to hear that they've actually got some pretty solid plans for this. So let me explain how it works first. You have a load of players in an area, and depending on how tightly packed they are, it will split those players out into little sort of cube-shaped nodes. The idea being that at any given time, each node has only got the same amount of load on it. So as more people get into an area, these nodes get smaller. You can still see what's going on and interact with the other nodes. It's just how it's actually balancing the loads on the servers themselves. And the idea behind this is when you get loads and loads and loads of people in a little area, you need a lot of power to handle it, and you need to make some trade-offs in order to do so. So you need to reduce how frequently you're updating those guys that are 200 meters away from you. But then when there's not many people in the same area, you can dedicate way more resources to making sure that that guy 200 meters away from you is updated constantly, because it's much more relevant. It's not a massive melee. And that way it kind of balances things out, and you'll always get a pretty smooth experience. And as you can see, they've shown some really quite impressive tests with like up to 1,200 of these bot client things they made to actually test the game out, and it seems to be working. It seems to work for them. But it does come with a couple of trade-offs. As I mentioned, it's all about that update rate. What that means is, just to use the example they gave, sniping isn't really something that's going to work too well, because you're talking huge distances, and the only way to get the whole thing to run really smoothly with this many people and completely seamlessly is to slow down how frequently things update the further away they are. So it means that someone that's 1.2 kilometers that way that you think, yeah, that could potentially be a sniper shop, especially in the future, that's not really going to be a thing. Which is fine. You've got to understand that there's going to be a trade-off in these scenarios. Either there's a loading screen somewhere, or they're obfuscating things at distance so that they aren't even there at all. There's something that's got to give in order to enable having this many players in one place. And it's kind of why I felt this was an important one to talk about first. Even though perhaps server architecture is kind of a boring subject, at the same time it's key to making a game like this actually function like they want. Another area we now know a ton more about is how their voxel building system will work and what exactly you can be able to build to begin with. And the coolest part of this has got to be how much control and detail you have over these voxel things. It's not just a case of, I'm putting down armor blocks and I better have the armor block I need. You can deform these things in all sorts of different ways, and there's grid tools to help you do so. In fact, the tool selection seems to be great. There's already stuff like copy and paste. They've got an undo function. Oh my god, an undo function. Would we not kill for that in some of these other games? So there's a lot of really cool tools, the way the painting system works. I mean, just using copy and paste as an example, it's not copy and paste sort of grid based, like say Space Engineers or Empyrean or whatever it is. It's copy and paste like you select an area of space and copy everything within that area, which is cool because it means that you don't have to have stuff connected together. You can copy bits, you can just imagine as a builder that's quite an exciting tool. As is the ability to connect two planes together. Now I have to explain this a bit because I'm not talking about two aircraft. I mean, when you've got the face of an object, so you've built a wall, you want to connect that in an interesting way to another face of a different object. And I'm trying to put some footage up in the background here to demonstrate what I'm talking about. But basically you can just click between these two surfaces and the game will figure out the rest as far as making a nice line between the two. And it gives you loads of control for how these things are going to look. And it's a bit of a shame that we actually haven't seen that much close up of some of the bigger ships and the more interesting ships. Mostly what we've seen is this sort of fighter craft we're seeing in the background. Now I do need to talk a bit about how, obviously the voxel system allows you to build these cool shapes, but they're decorative for the most part. They're structural and decorative, I should say. They're going to hold the ship together, but they don't actually serve any real purpose other than as armor and structure. So beyond that, you have blocks, functional blocks like the cockpit, like your thrusters, that seem to be at the moment prefabs. So if you understand that concept, you've got this shape and you've just got to fit it into your model, and it has that functionality. Which, I don't know, I'm a little bit disappointed by that. I wanted to have a little bit more flexibility, having seen how awesome the voxel system is. But I guess that's all going to ride on how many different models do we get, how many different types of engine are there, etc, etc. You know, that could actually end up being really cool. It just depends on how much we get and how much is it going to be limited, because so far, again, we've not seen the full gamut of what they've got to offer, definitely. Now, I've also got to mention one limitation that I was slightly surprised by, and then I thought about the footage I'd seen, and I was like, oh, actually, yeah, that's a fair point. That's not been in any of it. There are no wheels, and there's not planning to be any wheels on launch. So they're going with a kind of hovercraft approach, which, you know, it's the future, it makes some sense. I don't know why I want wheels so badly. There's just something about making buggies and rovers and that sort of idea that I've always really enjoyed that. So a little bit sad to see that that's not going to be a thing, at least initially. I mean, it's worth mentioning, at least initially is a big thing with this game, it seems. When you listen to the developers talk, they mention a lot of the time expansions. And that is a really concerning word to hear when you're thinking about backing a Kickstarter. You're like, oh my god, expansions, and you're already planning that. And I think a lot of that is because they want to keep a relatively real outlook on what's achievable initially, and then try and build the game later. And again, that immediately raises the question of, okay, but if you build the game later, where's the money coming from? And the answer is, this game is a subscription game, guys. A lot of people, I think, haven't homed in on that particular idea. It's going to be a subscription game. It's a big debate whether subscription is a good idea or a bad idea, how that's all going to work. But one thing it does do is enable a developer to continue to provide updates and content for a game after it's been launched. So from that respect, they are talking about the fact that all of these expansions, if you are a subscriber, they are going to be free. If you have a lifetime subscription, which you can get as one of the rewards for Kickstarter, they will be free. So it's not like you're going to be buying these expansions as well. But it's worth keeping that in mind whenever you're looking at this game. It is a subscription game. I believe it will have a free-to-play entry sort of level where you can do bits and bobs, and they have said it's got in-game purchasable game time, much like EVE or Warcraft or so on. So technically, once you're started, you can then earn your keep well enough to keep playing without spending any more real money. But you gotta remember this stuff. It's an important one to keep in mind, especially if you're considering backing on Kickstarter. For my personal opinion on that one, I'm not too bothered. I do understand the place of the subscription model, and I have seen too many games that end up sitting in early access forever because they almost don't end up with the right funding. They've got this funny double release thing where you release on early access, you get some cash, and then you release again for the launch, but by that point it's got to be done. And that gap in the middle seems to be really difficult for some developers to get through. So maybe Nova Quarkov got an interesting approach to this one. I don't know, but yet to be seen, just something I had to raise for you guys. Doesn't bother me, but it may well bother you. I also don't want that to come across like, oh, there's nothing in the game on launch, it's basically an early access title but that's launching and then building itself up with expansions. There's going to be a lot on launch. Everything they've shown with territory control, for example, which is an area that most games just don't go into. It's got all these MMO aspects like skills, for example, and factions, and as I said, territory ownership connected to factions and trading. The sort of elements that most sandboxes don't start with. They don't get anywhere near that. At the same time, the developers have also spoken about how big the universe is in terms of the known universe and like the actual universe. And the known universe is how far the players can actually reach, and the actual universe is obviously much larger than that. And just basically getting at the idea that the place is huge and it's going to take some time to get to some of these further places to expand as kind of a civilization. It does seem to be honing in on this idea that the players are, as a whole, are trying to not necessarily cooperate to create a civilization, but there is a civilization there created by the players' very presence, and how it goes about operating is kind of down to us. So there's a lot of elements there on release. I don't want people to make that sort of assumption that, oh, it's all going to be expansions. It's not like that. I just want to also be clear, that this expansion thing is how they intend to go about furthering the game and adding more cool content in. And it's really worth noting at this point, because I don't think they're making very much of this yet, and yet it's a relatively big thing for a game that's in Kickstarter. They've already got fully working, they call it pre-alpha, but it's pre-alpha with multiplayer and the voxel building system. There's limitations to it, but there are plenty of shots of multiple people in the world already, all working on spacecraft and messing around. So that engine is definitely getting along really nicely, and it's not like they've set themselves some goals that they haven't already made some progress towards, and have, to be honest, more than they could show us, I think. Now, they have talked about a huge amount of other little bits, like how the scripting system's going to work, which is really interesting and built into the blueprints and built into the marketplace, and even the ships that you make essentially generate a flight script when you run the cockpit for the first time, and you could, if you want to, go and modify that and make it fly differently, which is cool. I like the fact that for a new player, you don't need to worry about that. You can just get into the cockpit and it will behave as normal. But as soon as you get a bit more interested, a bit more into it, you can dive into that script, which is Lua, so it's really easy to pick up and actually have some influence. And they've talked about automating various bits of your setup as a player, specifically mentioning not mining, because they don't want to break that economy, but other areas in which you could actually create automatons, bots to go and do your bidding for you that were all running off this LUA script again. Could be really damn cool. Again, they've mentioned the marketplace and how they intend to have blueprints, but with a master blueprint, so that if you're the master blueprint owner, you can sell it, but people who don't have the master blueprint can't then remake the blueprint and sell it again. Lots there that are interesting systems that I think often games in this sort of genre don't aim towards. They aim towards much more of this sort of crafting, freedom aspect, add loads of blocks in. And Dual Universe is really gunning in on this sort of politics and faction ownership and all these sort of little systems that they want to try and add together to make, I guess, this emergent gameplay that they keep talking about. It's kind of a shady, shadowy, doesn't mean very much term, but in this case, they're talking about the sort of thing that Eve managed to pull off, where there's crazy events going off all the time, and it's mostly down to the players themselves having created all this stuff. The game will also have both a PvE element and a PvP element, although it's worth throwing out there, mentioning the expansions again, the PvE side of things they have said is going to be reasonably minor on launch and be expanded as they go, same way they've talked about the animal system, and potentially that could be expanded as they go with, things like farming or animal husbandry, which is, that just gives you an idea of what sort of crazy ideas these guys are coming up with, and what sort of system they're looking to create, how many different bits are going to come together to create this game, rather than it being more defined as this purely sandbox construction game. There's a lot more to it than that, it seems. And that's kind of why I think I'm intrigued for this one to get the backing. It's really close. So I guess that's why I'm doing this video, is to say at least take a look at it. Just be aware of some of these concerns I've thrown out there. I mean, the final one I'll end on, which surprised me, but I can kind of get it from a gameplay perspective, is that even though it's a construction sandbox game, there will not be any physical projectiles to begin with. So you won't be building torpedo ships and stuff like that, because at least to start off with, they're using that sort of ephemeral, the missile doesn't really exist, but based on your skills and your stats, you decide whether or not you hit. And then at the far end, the voxel system is going to let them do awesome things and blow holes through structures and take out components and so on. But they don't want it to develop into this sort of, I'm going to build a ramming ship because that's the best thing to do, which I guess is a good reasoning behind why it's not there. And of course then you've got stuff like structural integrity and all that other weirdness that you probably want to try and avoid. That's complex stuff, especially to begin with. But again, I'm going to throw it out there as something that's worth considering. There are bits in this that I would say really set it apart from some of the other sci-fi, construction, sandbox, survival sort of games, and you might like that, you might not. Just be aware, Dual Universe is gunning to be something that's got more of the Eve Star Citizen vibe to it than I think any of the ones we've had so far have. So it could be really, really interesting, and certainly some of the steps they've made, some of the things they've shown so far have been pretty damn cool. I'm pretty excited. If you guys are, hit me up down below. Let me know what you're excited for in the game, or even better, what you'd like to see in the game that they maybe haven't talked about yet, because they're certainly gunning for this idea of continual evolution. If you didn't like this video, if I've rambled far too long about my opinions, then you know where that dislike button is. By all means, whack that. And of course, thank you very much for watching. Consider hitting that subscribe button, and I will catch you for the next one.
you.